The sound of crying echoed through the crystalline corridors of Dracarian Prime, weaving between walls of molten glass that pulsed with the heartbeats of the planet itself. It was a strange sound in a palace built on silence, the cry of a newborn dragon, thin and fragile, as though life itself trembled inside its small-scaled body. The guards outside the hatchling's chamber stood motionless, their armor reflecting streams of magma running through transparent floors. None dared enter. The Emperor had forbidden it. He stood alone beside the cradle, his enormous form casting long, rippling shadows across the glowing chamber. His scales shimmered with metallic hues, gold when calm, crimson when anger stirred. The great dragon emperor, ruler of 10 suns, conqueror of 1,000 fleets, could not silence the sob of his own blood. For all the technology his empire had created, the hovering medbots humming beside the cradle, the temperature regulators tuned to perfection, nothing soothed the child. He had once commanded storms. He had split planets in two with a gesture. Yet now, faced with the frailty of life, his claws trembled. The Empress was gone, claimed by a sickness even the science of the stars could not heal. The Emperor's fire had turned to ash the day she died. Now the cry of their hatchling carved wounds deeper than any blade of war. The door hissed open with a timid sound. A woman stepped inside, her uniform marked with the dull gray of servant colonies. A human. Her name was Mara, though the Emperor did not know it yet. She froze as his gaze turned to her, eyes like twin suns burning through mist. "Leave," he said, his voice rumbling like tectonic plates grinding beneath oceans of fire. But the hatchling's cry rose again, sharper, desperate. The woman hesitated. Without waiting for permission, she approached the cradle. Her hands were calloused, trembling, but steady enough to lift the child's small head. The Emperor watched, his breath stilling. The medbot scanned her, uncertain whether to intervene, but the Emperor lifted a single claw and they retreated into silence. Then she began to hum. It was a melody older than the Empire, simple, human, without structure or science. A lullaby born of exhaustion and warmth, carried from a forgotten world lost among the stars. The sound vibrated through the air, soft and fragile, yet it reached the hatchling in a way nothing else had. The small creature blinked, its translucent scales flickering with faint light. The cries weakened, became soft hiccups, then stopped entirely. The Emperor could not move. His mind, sharpened by centuries of warfare and rule, could not analyze what had just occurred. The woman's song bypassed the logic of machines, the equations of energy, the protocols of power, and reached something deeper. The air around them shimmered faintly, as though the song resonated with the very frequency of the palace itself. When her voice faded, the silence that followed was heavier than before. The Emperor lowered his gaze, studying the human before him. She should have looked insignificant, a servant from a dying colony, a being made of fragile bones and water. Yet, in that moment, she appeared radiant. "Who taught you that sound?" he asked at last, his voice lower now, stripped of command. "My mother," she whispered. "On Earth. To help me sleep." He turned his gaze toward the quiet hatchling, its breathing steady, its small claws resting against her hand. For the first time in countless years, the Emperor felt something stirring in his chest, something alive, something terrifying. A warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Days passed within the obsidian spires of Dracarian Prime, but for the first time in centuries, the palace did not echo with the roar of command. The hatchling slept soundly in its cradle of silver veins and plasma silk, and every night, the same human voice carried through the endless corridors, soft, trembling, but unbroken. The melody had become an anomaly in the Emperor's domain, something no sensor could analyze, no scholar could define. Its frequency registered as warmth on the palace's temperature grids, a faint biological resonance that eluded all logic. Yet it was this anomaly that soothed the air of the most powerful being in the galaxy. Mara's presence became a paradox in the heart of a machine empire. She walked where drones glided, her soft footsteps out of place among corridors built for beings of flame and steel. Every servant, every officer, every scaled noble knew she did not belong. But the emperor had decreed that she remain near his son. His word was law, and none dared question it aloud. Still, whispers rippled through the court like coded transmissions. The emperor watched her often, unseen. Through the palace's translucent walls, his eyes followed her as she cared for the hatchling, fed it drops of ionized nectar, adjusted the warmth of its cocoon. He observed how her hands trembled slightly each time the child stirred, and how her fear slowly faded, replaced by a strange tenderness. The scent of human skin, the rhythm of her heartbeat, these were details his heightened senses registered with unnatural clarity. It unsettled him. One evening, when the suns of Dracarion aligned above the palace dome, painting the halls in streams of molten gold, he summoned her. She entered the throne chamber, where the walls pulsed with slow waves of energy, displaying fragments of distant galaxies conquered long ago. Her figure looked impossibly small beneath the emperor's massive form, wings folded, scales glinting with the reflection of entire worlds. "Sing," he said simply. His voice reverberated through the chamber like thunder swallowed by silence. Her throat tightened. "For the child. For me." The words were heavier than they should have been. They fell into the space between them and lingered there, fragile yet undeniable. She hesitated, unsure whether this was a command or something else entirely. But as the emperor's golden gaze held hers, she began. The melody rose again, slow, hesitant, trembling at first. It echoed against the walls of light, bending their patterns, altering their glow. For a moment, the palace's automated systems detected a flux in atmospheric pressure, a minor distortion in gravitational alignment, as though the very world reacted to the human voice. The emperor closed his eyes, and memories long buried began to surface. He saw his empress's face reflected in frozen starlight, heard the laughter of his people before they were warriors, before immortality had hardened their hearts. When she stopped, silence fell once more, but it was not the silence of power. It was the silence of awakening. The emperor opened his eyes and spoke softly, almost to himself. "Your species sings of sorrow as if it were hope." She looked down, unsure whether it was a question. "Maybe," she whispered. "Because hope is all we ever had." He studied her for a long moment, and something within him, something ancient and fiery, shifted. The flames that had always burned in his veins flickered not with fury, but with wonder. In that fragile melody, the Dragon Emperor had found something the stars themselves had failed to teach him. The star gardens of Dracarion were unlike any other place in the Empire. Suspended high above the molten clouds, they existed in a sphere of anti-gravity, where fragments of dying stars were kept alive within transparent orbs, rotating in slow, perfect harmony. It was there the Emperor summoned her again. The path to the gardens shimmered beneath her feet, nanoglass bridges illuminated by pulsing veins of energy. Around her, drones glided silently, scanning, observing, reporting, but none dared interrupt the strange summons of their ruler. Mara stepped forward, her reflection multiplied 1,000 times across the mirrored surface of the sky. The Emperor stood at the center of the vast platform, motionless, his wings folded like plates of molten armor. He seemed less a living being and more a monument carved from the light of dying suns. Yet when he turned, his expression was unreadable, not the gaze of a ruler studying a servant, but of something older, searching for something it did not understand. "You are afraid," he said. His voice carried through the chamber without echo, absorbed by invisible dampeners woven into the air. "Yes," she admitted, though the word came as barely a breath. "I don't belong here." "No one does," he replied. "Not even I." He gestured, and a soft pulse spread through the space. The orbs surrounding them began to shimmer, each revealing fragments of distant galaxies, images captured by the Empire's vast observatories. Mara watched in awe as 1,000 worlds bloomed like flowers of light. Planets turning in silence, nebulae breathing, suns collapsing and being born again. "You've seen the universe," she whispered. "All of it." "Enough to know it holds no heart," he said. Only hunger. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the swirling cosmos. Then why rule it? Because someone must, he said, but his tone faltered, as if the answer no longer satisfied even him. He looked at her again, at the fragile creature whose song had silenced the wailing of his child and, unknowingly, disrupted the rhythm of an empire. Your people, he said slowly, were conquered because they fought with words and dreams. Tell me, what strength did that bring you? She hesitated. The kind that survives even when everything else burns, she said. We remember. We build. We love. The last word lingered in the air like static. It was unfamiliar in that place of cold beauty, but the Emperor did not dismiss it. Instead, he stepped closer, the gravity shifting slightly with his movement. His shadow fell over her, vast, golden, heavy with power, yet she did not step back. He reached out one clawed hand. The air crackled with contained energy, plasma arcs whispering between his fingers. Then, slowly, impossibly gently, he turned his palm upward. Touch it, he said. Her hand trembled as she placed it against his. His skin was warmer than metal, yet not burning. Beneath the surface, she felt a rhythm, steady and powerful, a heartbeat that vibrated like the hum of a reactor core. His gaze did not waver, though something within it softened, a flicker of uncertainty. The fire that built my world, he murmured, never burned this way. For a moment, neither spoke. The universe turned above them in silence. In that fragile space between fear and trust, something began to take form, something that could not be measured by conquest or destroyed by time. And though neither of them understood it yet, the empire itself would soon tremble beneath the weight of that single touch. The days that followed were heavy with whispers. Even the walls seemed to carry them, soundless frequencies moving through the palace data streams, coded in the language of fear. The High Council had begun its silent war. To them, the Emperor's growing attention toward a human servant was more dangerous than any external rebellion. A weakness in the ruler's heart could unravel centuries of control, and in the heart of a galactic empire, weakness was contagion. Mara noticed the change before he did. The guards who once bowed without words now watched her with glassy eyes. The drones that floated overhead recorded her every movement. The corridors she walked through adjusted their lighting too slowly, as though the palace itself hesitated to accept her presence. Still, she continued her quiet routine, tending to the hatchling, humming softly when no one listened. But someone always did. The Emperor's sun grew stronger. The small creature now glowed faintly when he slept, tiny wings unfolding like liquid metal, reflecting starlight that wasn't there. Each time Mara held him, his scales pulsed with warmth instead of fire. The Emperor saw this and said nothing. Yet something within him darkened. For the first time, he could sense the current of defiance beneath the surface of his empire, like the low hum of a reactor before it explodes. When the summons came, it arrived in silence. A council member, tall, serpent-eyed, wrapped in ceremonial armor, bowed low and said, "Your Majesty, the hatchling's illness worsens." The Emperor's brow furrowed. Impossible. His readings were stable this morning. The medbots detect a foreign trace. Organic contamination. The words hung heavy. Within minutes, the child was surrounded by healers, their scales shining with artificial light. Mara was dragged from the chamber by guards in black armor, her protests drowned by the hiss of closing doors. In the shadows of the corridor, she saw the council's insignia glowing faintly on the soldiers' shoulders, a silent signature of betrayal. The Emperor arrived too late to find her. The hatchling lay still in its cradle, monitors flickering with unstable readings. The air smelled of sterilized fear. His gaze swept the room, reading every data trace, every molecular anomaly. Then he felt it, a faint psychic tremor from the child's mind, one wordless image, burned into his thoughts, her. Outside, the accusation had already spread through the palace networks. The human poisoned the air. She bewitched him with her voice. Her songs carry toxins. The rumors multiplied like living code, spreading across systems faster than light. He strode through the halls, fire bleeding from his wings, melting the floors beneath his steps. When he reached the detention chamber, Mara was already bound by magnetic cuffs, her face pale under the cold blue light. She lifted her eyes to him, not pleading, not crying, only afraid that he might believe them. "Did you touch the child before he fell ill?" His voice trembled between rage and disbelief. "I did," she whispered. He couldn't sleep. The silence stretched, sharp and unbearable. For a moment, even the air seemed to pause, waiting for judgment. Then, from somewhere deep within the palace, a sound echoed, the soft, strangled cry of the hatchling, alive. The Emperor's head turned sharply toward the sound. His breath caught. And in that single heartbeat, the truth burned through him like plasma through steel. His fury erupted. The chains around Mara disintegrated in a flash of molten light. The guards screamed as their armor melted, and the corridor ignited with fire that no machine could withstand. The Emperor's roar tore through the palace, shaking the foundations of the empire. Above the flames, his voice thundered. "Who dares accuse her?" No one answered. Only the silence of the guilty remained. The palace was burning. Not with physical flame, though the air shimmered with heat, but with something deeper, more primal. The Emperor's fury had awakened the ancient core beneath Dracarian Prime. Energy conduits pulsed erratically, and the sky outside turned crimson, streaked with lightning that cracked through the planet's protective shields. The Empire's network shuddered under the weight of its ruler's wrath. Across the galaxy, ships halted mid-flight as command signals broke apart into chaos. The Emperor's pain had become a broadcast felt across 10 suns. Mara stood amid the destruction, trembling as the ground vibrated under her feet. The corridor's molten edges rippled like liquid glass. Guards and nobles fled in silence, their voices erased by the hum of collapsing gravity stabilizers. She saw him standing at the end of the hall, wings unfurled, eyes blazing like twin stars devouring themselves. Yet beneath that terrible power, there was something she recognized: grief. He walked toward her slowly, each step fracturing the floor. The air warped around him, distorting sound and light, bending reality itself. When he stopped before her, the flames recoiled, drawn back as though afraid of him. "They tried to destroy what they didn't understand," he said, his voice quieter than the storm but heavier than any sound she had ever heard. She wanted to speak, but her throat closed. Her pulse echoed through her body, small and fragile in the void of his presence. The hatchling's cry came again, faint, but alive. The sound carried through the crumbling corridors like a thread of light. Mara turned toward it instinctively, and the Emperor followed her gaze. He moved his hand, and the walls dissolved into pure energy, revealing the child floating within a protective stasis field. Its small body glowed silver blue, the illness already fading. "They poisoned my mind before they could poison him," the Emperor murmured. "They wanted me to believe you were a threat." She looked up at him, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her face. "Then believe what you saw. Not what they say." He closed his eyes. When they opened again, the fire within them had changed, no longer rage, but revelation. The Emperor raised his head and roared, a sound that shattered every sealed gate in the palace. The High Council's chambers crumbled beneath invisible pressure. Energy storms tore through the sky as if the planet itself obeyed his fury. Mara's voice cut through it, trembling, small, and yet more powerful than the storm. She sang. The same melody that had once calmed his child, now reaching toward the Emperor himself. The notes traveled through the heat, through the chaos, finding him at the center of destruction. The sound changed everything. The flames dimmed, the broken air steadied, the warships above the planet went silent. Her song was not command, not submission, but something beyond both, a reminder of what it meant to feel. The Emperor sank to one knee, claws pressed into molten glass. His armor, his crown, his symbols of power, all seemed meaningless before the sound of that human voice. He looked at her, and his words came out as a whisper drowned in light. "You've defeated me, Mara. Not with force, but with what I've forgotten." When her song faded, silence fell across Dracarian Prime. The palace still burned, but softly now, like embers remembering warmth. The Emperor rose slowly, his eyes no longer the eyes of a conqueror. "The Empire will learn what it means to live," he said. "Even if it must unlearn everything I built." And as the first dawn broke through the smoke-filled sky, the Dragon Emperor, feared by galaxies, knelt before a human and her song, while the universe held its breath and listened. Years passed, and the Empire changed with the rhythm of its ruler's silence. The old banners of conquest were removed from the halls of Dracarian Prime, replaced with gardens that bloomed under artificial suns. Where once there had been laboratories of war, there were now chambers of study, art, and light. The planet that had trembled beneath its emperor's rage now breathed again, a living world, no longer a fortress. Across the systems, fleets withdrew from occupied worlds, and entire species watched in disbelief as the most feared power in the galaxy began to heal what it had broken. The Dragon Emperor no longer held court upon his throne of molten glass. He walked among his people instead, his massive form diminished only in title, never in presence. His golden armor had dulled to silver, his crown melted down into fragments that powered the orbiting gardens. He no longer commanded, he listened. Yet, even as peace returned, legends grew, tales of the immortal emperor who had bowed before a human song. Some called it weakness. Others whispered that it was the moment the galaxy first remembered compassion. Mara stayed by his side. Her role was never named, never declared, yet her influence rippled through every decision he made. Together they raised the hatchling, who now walked in both worlds, scales shimmering with the glow of draconic fire, eyes reflecting the softness of his mother's lullabies. He would be the first heir to rule not with fear, but with understanding. One evening, under the dome of the rebuilt palace, they stood together, watching the orbit of the artificial moons. The Emperor's wings caught the faint light, their golden edges fading to white. "When I first conquered this world," he said quietly, "I thought peace was a word used by the weak. Now I see it was only a word I had not earned." Mara smiled faintly. "You didn't find peace, Arkel. You made it." He looked at her then, the immortal and the mortal, bound not by power, but by something more enduring than flame. The air shimmered softly, reacting to the harmony of their presence, even the palace systems registered it as a frequency of calm. In the distance, the hatchling, now nearly grown, spread its wings and lifted into the crimson sky. Its roar echoed across the horizon, not in fury but in celebration. The Empire heard it as a promise. Mara leaned against the Emperor's arm, her voice low. "Do you ever miss what you were?" He thought for a long time. "No," he said at last. "I only wish I had met you before I became it." As the sons of Dracarian aligned one final time that night, the palace filled with light. Not from fire, but from within, as though the world itself exhaled. The Emperor closed his eyes, listening to the hum of life around him, the same hum that had once come from a single fragile song. He understood now that empires end, but moments like that, small, human, infinite, outlast the stars. When Mara began to hum again, the sound traveled far beyond the palace, beyond the planet, through the dark between suns. Across the galaxy, worlds paused to listen, not knowing why they felt warmth where there should have been cold. And for the first time in recorded history, the universe itself seemed to rest, in the quiet rhythm of a lullaby that had tamed a god.